and I look at the race of my clients, how have the judgments been different? How have the jury selection, how many of the, even when we came to out of court agreements, how have those things been different? And the same is true with sentencing. I think that we should be constantly keeping and reviewing statistics on sentencing, who gets those sentences, and which county they get them in, the location. Data has its flaws. It's not 100% reliable because it's kept by human beings, but it's certainly better than going on what you think you saw in court, right? Even the busiest lawyer is not in every court every day. And so I know that under Judge Clayton's so I don't see myself as being a person who is biased against my against people of a particular group. Then but the data tells me something different, and perhaps I should work. And that should be true for people who come from Eastern Kentucky. I have my students tell me all the time about how even lawyers in interviews will make fun of their accent still in Lexington, Kentucky, in the our Lord's year of 2020. So we have to pay attention to as much as you can do to keep track of, to make sure that there is some consistency in the ways in which you're doing your work. Is very helpful, but the state most definitely should be tracking those statistics and reviewing them, if not annually, at some regular period, in order to evaluate what's happening. And one of the things that states, not just North Carolina, but the state of Missouri did this as well, is they created a system where before new criminal laws were passed, they had to go through the state's budget office to determine the budgetary impact of those new statutes. So if you pass a new criminal statute, then how might that statute, what is the percentage of crime it will reduce, and how much will it increase state funds that we have to put out for incarcerating those persons? And often in the balance, what you find is there likely is already a law that does that in your statutes. We have too many laws. There are too many criminal laws, overlapping, covering the same behavior. And the cost of incarceration, or how much it would take in state dollars, outweighed even the reduction in crime that you would find by implementing a new law as opposed to sticking with the laws that you already had.
And I think, actually, I mean, Kentucky is supposed to do that, whether or not they look at those numbers. But one of the things you touched on when you first opened up, Dr. Price, in your remarks, you said, when we're looking at discretion, as it comes to sentencing guidelines, what sentencing guidelines do is it takes away discretion. And do we want the folks that are in Frankfort to be the ones to decide how Lexington, even though they're not necessarily representing all of Lexington? So we have certain delegates that are there, but they would then decide how that statute and how that sentence must be done, because it would be statutorily determined. And that removes the discretion from our judges. Now, as Dr. Price says, if we're really trying to attack the issue, it really is from data. It's not necessarily trying to make every round peg fit inside the square hole because we're trying to fit everybody there. Yes, I think if you take away a judge's discretion, you may find yourself with even harsher sentences for individuals. And I think we saw that. We saw that on a federal level, right, when we had some sentencing guidelines that, and federal prosecutors, as it said, I mean, I had the opportunity to work in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and you look, and it's just like, it is what it is. This is what it is. There's no deviating from this. And so that discretion and how you use it it becomes the issue, which is important, as Dr. Price says, is that so we have to look at the numbers. And even if you never thought that yourself that you were looking at anything with any bias or anything there, if the numbers say otherwise, how do you correct that behavior? And how do we make sure that justice is achieved for every individual that walks in that courtroom? And that's what we have to do.
And I agree with Judge Murphy. I was going to say the same thing. The discretionary factor is what worries me if the state went to a sentencing guideline structured like that. Because I can speak from experience on the federal court level, it can be very, very frustrating to deal with those sentencing guidelines and realize they're, although they're not advisory anymore or not mandatory, they're advisory, they're followed. And we've seen the mass incarceration that's come from the sentencing guidelines. So the discretionary factor is there. And I think on a private practice level, I think you do have a duty to try to keep track of the history of sentencing with your clients, that way you can use that as a tool when something else comes up and say, hey, this was done in this case, what's the difference here, type of thing. And I know every case is not the same, but I would be real hesitant to see a sentencing guideline instituted on the state of Kentucky and so forth.
Kentucky has made some progressive moves. I mean, even before the nation in the last decade, they have been trying to move forward. The question is, when will you make these moves towards more progressive, more human-centered, human-minded ways of dealing with crime and criminal behavior? How do we make sure that Black people of color also benefit from that generosity and not just non-people of color?
Talking about criminal or crime classification and in its relation to drug use, drug possession, marijuana possession, as it sort of becomes legal in more and more states, what considerations do you believe should be given to minorities that are disproportionately charged or sentenced for those criminal offenses?
I think any kind of legalization scheme.
What was the question?
Is it the legalize it question? Marijuana? Is that
Yes.
what you're asking us, Cassie? I think any kind of legalization scheme that does not include a retrospective amnesty for people convicted under statutes that are now people would not be convicted of is criminal. So one of the things that we have seen in some of the states where we have seen the legalization of marijuana is that even though the sale and distribution of marijuana in certain amounts is now lawful, those people who were selling the same amounts of marijuana, small amounts, low scale drug operations out of their homes are forbidden from participating in what is now a profitable business in their communities. Or you still see the number of people selling without a license and being criminally prosecuted disproportionately impacting sort of Black and brown people. So you can't think through a scheme for any kind of legalization without thinking through how do we mitigate the damage done by those people, done to those people who have been impacted by these laws previous to a new reframing. I don't have huge opinions on legalization. I'm not against it. And I don't know that I'm hugely for it, except that the tax revenue, from what I understand, is quite substantial. And I have a kid in public schools. So if that is, so if you tell me that's what it would do, then I'd be like, let's get right on that. But you have to think about it in a kind of fair way, right? And personal, I don't know. I had an uncle who kept his own stash of what he called glaucoma medicine. So we know that people are engaging in responsible ways in the inculcation, the intake of this drug. So it's coming. The question is, what will it look like in Kentucky?
And I think one interesting thing, and this is just a complaint and tangent that I have, but overwhelmingly we are seeing cars searched in Kentucky for the smell of marijuana. The way the law is written, smell of marijuana alone won't allow you to probable cause to get in the house, but because you have a lesser privacy interest, it allows an officer to immediately search your car. And an interesting debate that's going on among the circuits in some of these states where it has been legalized, they're now have to address the fact that if it's now been legalized, how does that give probable cause to get into an individual's vehicle? But we're seeing these claims when police are pulling somebody over for no registration or no insurance, and then they're searching their car and finding other contraband based off the smell of marijuana, but they never find marijuana. And so it's an interesting thing to watch in the states that have legalized it and are now addressing whether police can use the odor of marijuana to get into a vehicle. But we're seeing it used disproportionately in low income areas on individuals being pulled over to get into their vehicle when in fact there's no marijuana, but it's the officer's testimony that he smells it, and it's how do you overcome that? And so I think moving forward, it's going to be very interesting to see how these states handle where they've legalized and the probable cause to get into vehicles and so forth. But that's a whole nother tangent I can go on down that road.
There's a very funny meme going around in our COVID world where the person says, I can't remember if it's a police officer or someone else says to a person, "You smell like marijuana," and the person says, "You're not social distancing." We in our pre-panel discussion, we talked about this a little bit. I mean, a lot of things have to be rethought in the wake of any kind of change in how we regulate any kind of substance, right? So when we moved from having allergy medicine behind the counter to allergy medicine over the counter, when we move from, there's so many things that when you have to figure out and think through the consequences of what they will mean. And so it just can't be done lightly.
Right. Not to get off on a tangent and tell a war story, but I mean, we have a case right now where on the body camera, the officer's about 50 yards away from the vehicle, and they go back and forth and kind of chuckle and then go and pull the individual out of the vehicle. I mean, it's being used so disproportionately and so common to get into people's vehicles. And it's just, I think something that it's going to be addressed hopefully at some point, but it's going to be interesting to watch.
And for those who are interested, we put a case in the handout, Moberly versus Commonwealth, that just came out in 2018 about traffic stops and dog sniffs, sort of related to that topic. So we have just under 15 minutes left, and one thing I wanted to talk about was the prison to school pipeline and what policies Kentucky can adopt to be part of a solution. How do we increase policing in schools? Does that contribute to the problem? And how can youth sentencing be changed to be kind of part of that solution? So that's a big question, I know, but
that's a huge question, Cassie, a huge question. I always come from this vantage point. I've said this often because so many people don't believe the school to prison pipeline kind of exists. So you have to come from the premise it's real and it's legitimate, and you can look at the numbers and say when you have private prisons that are being built based on the level of academic achievement of third graders or fourth graders, and they're therefore determining how many private prisons they need because they believe, well, if this third and fourth grader is not on reading level, then more than likely they're going to be the occupants of our prison. So we know that it exists. There is this pipeline. We have to be aware, and maybe I'm sunshine and rainbows type of person, but I believe everything is connected to another. So if our education system is failing, then that means that some other way and cog in the wheel is failing. That means that there's effects on our criminal justice system. That means, which also then affects our economic system, which also affects our housing system. So everything is just connected to one another. So we have to first, and I'm just coming from the vantage point that we acknowledge that it's real. So then when we insert our school law enforcement, and I know some amazing officers within Fayette County Public Schools, ones that I am grateful that their presence was in the school because of the mentorship that they had for my son. But we have to look at what those numbers look like and how the disparate impact or disparate treatment and encounters with those individuals and our young people within the school system, and how it often is more of our children of color than it is otherwise. And so those numbers, being a part of the solution and working, there are so many different ways that we need to attack it. And so that's the reason I start from the premise. We have to attack it first because we've got to figure out having great housing and affordable housing so that we have family stability. We have to attack it from the vantage point that our education system has to get stronger. We have to attack it from our, as I always say, why would Commerce Lexington ever care about Fayette County Public Schools? Because they recognize that these are their future workforce. So everything in our community is connected to one another. And if we don't take the time to build up each side of it, then we're going to find ourselves that some part is failing. And so, and that's coming from my heart as far as I'm an advocate when it comes down to our public school system. I've worked in the school system. And so that then leads to the fact that our kids find themselves in situations in juvenile court that we don't want them there. That's not where we want our kids to be. And so we have to figure out a way that we're attacking those issues on the front end of how they're getting there. But then also how we are propping up that system by having more law enforcement encounters. I think even our school system realized, okay, yeah, we have school safety officers, but what about the social workers? And what about those school counselors? We've cut those. I think we can all say that when we were in school, we probably had a counselor we can go to and talk about college and things like that. And now we've got counselors that are, 1 to 250 is the ratio. It becomes something that we have to do a better job of addressing all of the issues that are connected to one another if we're really going to get to an answer or solution.
I think we also, when we talk about officers in schools, I grew up with an officer in school. We called them SAMs, the substance abuse monitor. They were there to prevent us from using drugs. And I could say with some certainty that the people who were inclined to use drugs continue to do so, despite his presence. Nice man, but it was not as effective as we had hoped because they sent in the wrong solution for the problem. But I think we also have to remember that there are children in schools who have experienced trauma that the police can reignite. The presence of police officers, particularly uniformed police officers, children who've been taken from their homes, even if it was a legitimate removal of children, those children may see officers. There are a lot of ways in which we expect children to, I always tell my law students this story as well. So when I was growing up, I was not taught, like, if you get lost, find an officer. That's not the lesson we were taught. We were told, if you get lost and we're in a crowd, you find the oldest Black woman you could find, you see, and you tell her that that you cannot find your mother. Do not go to the officer. Go to find this person and she will help you. And I think that the notion that every community finds safety in the presence of law enforcement is one we have to disabuse ourselves of, even if one believes that our police force is the best in the world. There are still historical and current reasons why some may not have that same amount of trust, and children are among that population. So we need to just be careful about how we think that through.
So we're coming to the close of our panel discussion, and I wanted to leave just a few minutes for the panelists just to wrap up on any closing remarks that they may have, and any changes that they would like to see in Kentucky or in Lexington, in our community, and how we on this call can maybe be a part of that.
I don't have any sweeping changes I would like to see in Lexington, but I mostly get to see practicing lawyers on the front end, like before they're sworn in rather than after. And as a person who is now taught, I was trying to add it up a few minutes ago, but probably are now thousands of lawyers at this point. I would like for us to consistently remind people that we are people who are, that we, why the positive reasons about why we come to be lawyers or to study the law, and that the important power, I always talk about lawyer with my students of lawyers as citizens. We're a particular type of citizen, that in our communities, we may have been the people who have had the most significant engagement with the Constitution. People are constantly asking me about the laws of seatbelts, which I don't know. If I get stopped by a cop and my seatbelt is under my, and I keep telling them I took no courses on seatbelts. But because you are a lawyer, people will come to you, they will ask you to read things, they will ask you questions that you know are not really legal questions, but really are trying to express a concern about some injustice. And I just ask that those of you who are in the profession, and which many of you already do, continue to be a sort of light for fairness, a light for justice, to be a real role model in our community about the best of what our profession is and can be.
And I'll be quick. I've when I was a young prosecutor, I once had a defense attorney call me, "You're too idealistic. You need to calm down." Trying to think of a better term other than what I was about to say, but it really irritated me, and it involved a case where a young white girl from a very rich part of town had a motion filed to get rid of her case that made no sense whatsoever, and it was ultimately granted because of a relationship that I found out later between families and so forth. And it really, really irritated me because I'd seen young African Americans be treated completely opposite in the same type of case. And so, from that point on, I developed a passion. I cannot stand to see inequality. And so that's how I kind of got to where I am 13 years now in the practice of doing civil rights practice and criminal defense and whatnot. But one practical change, and I'm really passionate about this, is I would love to see the state, we do police misconduct cases in Kentucky and Tennessee, and I'd love to see the states get an independent commission to investigate these police misconducts. I don't that no longer can police investigate their own. And I really truly am passionate about, we need an independent commission made up of representatives of all parties to investigate these police misconduct issues moving forward. If we're going to gain trust with the community again, because it's just not working what we're doing right now. And so that is one change I would love to see. I don't know if we'll ever see it, but that's something I truly advocate for. When anybody ever asks me, what do you want to see change? And that's really high on the top of the list, because too many times we're seeing things being presented to a grand jury and it's just staying there. You never hear about it again. And so that's just a change I'd like to see. And so thank you all for your time.
I think I'll wrap up, and I'll just say exactly what Dr. Price said. And I had the opportunity, I was just a judge for maybe 2 months, and I had the opportunity to do the presentation for new lawyers about their responsibilities and their duties to the court. And I say it from the premise, and this is what I told them, it's not necessarily a duty to the court, it's a duty to yourself. You took the opportunity to, for all of us as lawyers, we took the opportunity to go through which was, for some of us, may not have been the most easiest or the easiest of times to achieve this degree, to pass the bar exam, and now to be a practicing attorney within the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And the one thing that I noted when I started going through the preamble of our rules of professional conduct talks about the lawyer's responsibility. And the one thing that stood out to me is that, one, a lawyer is supposed to be one of the strongest advocates for the preservation of our society. And the biggest thing about it is that we are supposed to have an integral role in how we preserve and administer justice. And so what does justice look like, and making sure that it is fair for every citizen of our state? We should take that serious. we should hold that at the high calling of that. And I know that sounds very preachy, but I think we all have to look at, why did we do this? And if we sat there and we raised our right hand and we took that oath, this is our responsibility. And it's our responsibility to get it right, especially as attorneys that represent this state. So that's my hope. And so, yes, maybe I'm, again, rainbows and sunshine, maybe that's me, but I believe that for us, that we should be on the front line of change, because we are lawyers, and that was what we all agreed to do. So that's my
Melissa, if we don't believe in justice and the pursuit of justice as a worthy thing, how can we convince other people
exactly
of the legitimacy of what we do?
exactly. Yeah.
Well, we've come to the end of our hour and a half. I can't believe it. Thank you so much, panelists. This was a great discussion. I appreciate your work and everything that you did to prepare for today, and also everything that you're doing in our community. To everyone who attended, thank you for being here. Don't forget, the other 2 panel discussions in this series will be September 10th and October 8th. And I'm sure that Dana will be sending an email invite for those as well. Thanks so much. Have a good day. If Dana has something to say, she can go ahead.
No, everything's great. Thanks, guys. It was wonderful. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, attendees, send us an email. We will be sending you an email if you signed up online with the CLE accreditation form and a little survey to fill out. So
Thank you.
thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you all.